Hello everyone, this is James Shore with another test-driven development video. Today is December 21st and I'm picking up where I left off in the last episode. We had just gotten testing of our Save As dialog. So now when we press the save or we have our test actually press the save button in the dialog or pretend to and press the cancel button, and they both work. So as a result, when I run this, and it hooks up to the application model, which is just stubbed out with a print method right now. So when I run this, I should be able to save. So we should see that show up here when I click the save button. Yep, save called. And when I click the cancel button, nothing should happen. And that's exactly what we want to do. So that is great. That's really awesome. So we've finally finished the UI portion of this. Now it's not 100% finished. I did take some notes on stuff that needs to happen. And one of those, the biggest one would be that we've got to just deal with some special cases. But I don't feel like dealing with that right now. I really want to get more into the persistent side of things. And for the moment anyway, these aren't particularly an issue. So let's move on. So I do want to do some cleanup though. So let's actually take a look at our tasks. What do we have here? We've got that stub and application model and this here. So we do have our mock model, our application frame being created a couple of times here. Do we want to pass that in every case? Let's see what would happen. If we used a SPI rather than a real model, would our test break? Nope, works just fine. So I think I can take this out and this out. And that should still work. But to make this more explicit, let's call that a mock model. Okay. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. The only thing I don't really like is that I've made this doSave method somewhat public. It's a package protected method. And I actually do like having it separated out as a separate method. That's kind of nice, except that it would be better if it was taking the values stored in the Save As dialog, but I wanted to test that those were actually being called directly. I wanted to test these lines of code because this is really untested and untestable too, unless I were to use something like window licker. So this is a little bit ugly. I'm not thrilled with it, but that is kind of the nature of UI testing. Unfortunately, in most cases, it does get a little bit ugly. I think this is as clean as it's gonna get. So let's set that aside. It's done, and now we can move on to the application model. There is one other thing though, and that is at some point in the future I want to see if we can get rid of application model entirely. If we get rid of application model, SPI entirely, that means we have to switch to a different kind of testing rather than using a mock-based approach, or what some people call behavior testing. We could go to a state-based testing approach, which I tend to prefer. It's usually simpler, it's easier to debug, it's easier to understand. There's a trick to it that is a bit on the ugly side, but it really does cut the Gordian knot. So might want to look at that later. But what we have is working right now, so I think I'm just going to keep it as is. The problem with using the mock-based approach is that it doesn't test that things are wired together properly. It doesn't test that application frame is being constructed with the correct application model. And I do think we test that in application frame test, but I'm not sure that we do. Actually, how do we do that? Let's just take a quick look. It's not application frame that's doing that wiring. It would be probably application. Oh, and it's application frame.new window, right? So new window, yeah, it's not testing that that model is being created properly. So what that means is that, what that means is that in application frame.new window, this line of code, this little piece of code right here is not being tested. And in a mock heavy testing approach, that happens a lot, that those aren't tested. So you have to have end-to-end tests to prove that those pieces are hooked up. It's not really a problem because I'm doing so little mocking, but if you're using a mock-heavy approach, that becomes a point of failure in your testing. And I prefer an approach which, to use the security term, is more defensive in depth. In other words, every test not only tests the unit you're testing, but it also, as a side effect, tests that things are hooking together properly, because the application is always wired together. You're not using mocks to do basically two different applications using the same components. And if that doesn't make sense, well, we'll come back to it in the future if I do come through and eliminate the application model. So yeah, there's some downsides to mocks, and that's why I prefer not to use them. And I do have some ideas about how we can eliminate them entirely from pretty much the entire application. There's some ugliness that goes along with that, and the trade-off is mocks have some ugliness too, so which is less ugly. But we're not going to do that now, so let's move on. So we need to test application model. Specifically, we need to test that save is working properly. Right now it's just stubbed. And what we want save to do is we want it to actually do the persistence. And you know what? If we continue doing this top-down approach, we're going to end up creating more and more mocks to test the behavior of stuff that's not implemented yet. And I don't really want to do that. So instead of that, let's not do application model right now. Instead, let's dive right into, let's do a bottom-up approach. Let's go right into persistence. And specifically, let's create a class to represent a save file. And let's call it SaveFile. And where should we put that? I could put it in the UI, I could put a model, I could create a brand new package for it called persist or persistence. Yeah, let's make a new file, a new package called persistence. Okay, and in there, let's create. What is up with you? Huh. Every time I clicked it, it would disappear. Let's create a new test case. It's my button. I think my mouse is failing. Let's test, let's call it a SaveFile test. So rather than calling it a persister or something like that, I'm going with a more object-oriented approach and just making it a save file. And that's what we're going to start with. So and way back when I was doing the UI, I got some comments on my blog saying, why don't you start, just forget about the save dialog, go in and make something save. And that was good advice. I was concerned about getting the UI working at that point, so I didn't want to do that. But now that the UI is working, I think I'm going to follow that advice. I'm going to go in and I'm going to actually make the save code work, and then I'll bring it back up and hook it to the UI portion. So, which means that this code's not going to be wired up for a little bit, and that's okay. So, what are we going to test? Well, I guess I'm just sort of thinking this through. Does this mean that we want this to take the place of the file in application frame? So here we're creating a file. Do we want to say new save file? Or do we want application model to say new save file? I think I'd rather have application model do that. So that means here, when I create save file, I'm going to create it. I don't know what we're testing yet. I'm going to create it with file. So we'll save file equals new save file. Then we'll pass in a file. Do we want to do that? I don't know. Really what I want to do is actually at this point I want to do nothing more than just create a file. So I want to say save creates a file. So let's just do that. Let's create a save file and then say file.save and then assert that file is created. That will get us going. We're going to sneak up on this like we always do. Start out with no clue of what we're doing and arguably finish with no clue. No, we're going to start out with no clue and then just sort of work through it, and by the time we're done, what we have will look pretty good, I think. So let's create the class, and we'll create that in the same place. Here's our save file, and we'll need to create a save method, and yeah, there we go. Okay. Now, let's go ahead. Now that we're going to actually touch the file system, we're going to assert that a file is created. That means we're going to actually touch the file system. And we're really not going to want to just drop files anywhere. What we need to do is create a temporary file for this. So how do we do that? File.create temp file. Great. Oh, cool. Create an empty file in the default temporary file directory. Well, that's okay, except that I don't want to actually create it. I just want to get a file name. So we're out of time for this episode. I'm going to do a little bit of research on this offline, and then in the next episode, that's what we'll pick up with. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you next time.